wave of hope.
Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, The Pulse. Critically analyzing global affairs, The Muckrakers. Today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Well, fantastic new trailer. There we go. The Muckrakers, and welcome along. It's Andrew Eborn here. And here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. Our mission is to provide more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to uncover the truth and to inform, educate and entertain with integrity, dignity and respect. And as always, it's vital we don't just ask the questions, but question the answers. Well, today I'm absolutely thrilled because we're looking at Donald Trump 2.0 and Roger Stone, the legend that is Roger Stone, and his brilliant New York Times bestseller, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Roger Stone, if you don't know, is a seasoned political operative, speaker, pundit, and New York Times bestselling author. He was featured in the Netflix documentary Get Me, Roger Stone. He's a veteran of 10 national presidential campaigns. He served as senior campaign aide to 4 Republican presidents, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George W.H. Bush, and Donald J. Trump. Mr. Stone served as chairman of Donald Trump's presidential exploratory committee in 2000 and strategic consultant in 2012. I'm thrilled to be joined by Roger. Welcome.
Be here. I have to hope, however, that my tailor does not see this over there because, well, I owe him money.
Well, there you go. You were very kind, Roger. Just before we came on air, you said you quite like my suit.
It looks terrific. Absolutely looks terrific. Very, very similar. You can't see it, but very similar to what I'm wearing today. So,
well, you did say, and I want to love one of your wonderful quotes, and your career is peppered with glorious quotes. If life is a stage, then you should always be in costume, is what you said.
Well, I think you never get, as they say, a second chance to make a first impression. If you're engaged in business, well, you need to be dressed for business. So look good, feel good. Another one of my rules. I'm delighted to be with you today. There's so much to talk about. We're undergoing a second American revolution of sorts. Donald Trump proving to be what I always thought he would be, a transformative president. Challenging many of the current status quo spending, particularly by this government. Frankly, I think the Democrats and the hard left are apoplectic. They're near hysterical. They're suddenly arguing that the chief executive does not have authority over the executive branch, which is, of course, absurd. And the level of waste and fraud and outright corruption that Elon Musk and the folks at Doge are exposing really boggles the mind. Yesterday, we learned that there were $4.7 trillion worth of expenditures that we were not really certain where that money actually went. But we've learned some shocking things, $140 million to the New York Times, $80 million to Politico. These are supposed to be news outlets. They're supposed to be journalistic enterprises. I can't imagine why the government would be paying them, unless, of course, it is to prop up false narratives like the Russian collusion hoax or Ukrainian impeachment 1 or Ukrainian impeachment 2 or the loss of the 2020 election, which I still question. So it's an exciting time. Trump has hit the ground running. I honestly believe that his 4 years in the wilderness, his 4 years of fighting the tsunami of lawfare against him, which they tried to destroy him financially, tried to keep him off the ballot, tried to throw him in jail. It's the kind of thing you would see in Soviet Russia or back in Nazi Germany. But he's overcome all of it, and he's doing an amazing job. His poll numbers are through the roof. The American people approve of his efforts to not only deport the most dangerous criminals and terrorists among us who are here illegally, but also for a major financial accountability where our tax dollars have been going.
Yeah, and it is phenomenal. As you say, the Doge was set up originally just to look at inefficiencies, the Department of Government Efficiency. That was the whole idea of it. But it's exposing all sorts of apparent corruption, which obviously we need to keep shining a spotlight. I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. But I want to start, if I may, Roger, and you kindly said I could call you Roger, with you and your glorious career. They always said, it was Aristotle who says, show me a boy until the age of 7 and I'll show you the man. You started your political career at the tender age of 8. Tell me about that, supporting John F. Kennedy.
Well, I was, I'm from a Catholic household. I grew up in outside New York City in Connecticut. And I think it was in the second grade. I decided they were having a mock election between Vice President Richard Nixon and Senator John Kennedy. Now, when you're that age, you don't know much about politics. I favored Kennedy, well, largely because he had much better hair than Nixon. And so in order to affect this mock election being held at my elementary school, I stood in the line in the cafeteria, and as each student got their lunch, I told them that they needed to be aware that if Nixon was elected, well, we'd be required to go to school on Saturdays. So my first experience with disinformation. Of course, I've never used it since that time.
Ah, no, glorious. So what inspired you to get such political cunning at such a young age?
Well, my interest in politics really came because a neighbor gave me a book called The Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater. Up until that time, I guess I aspired to be an actor. And then I ultimately figured out that politics was show business for ugly people, really. But I read this book and I immediately identified with the message of smaller government, lower taxes, less government regulation of your private life, the right to privacy, a strong national defense, but as a deterrent to war rather than going around the globe looking for foreign conflicts where we had no inherent, public interest. So I immediately decided that politics is what I wanted to do, and that I was a conservative in the mold of Goldwater, in the mold later of Ronald Reagan. I've been very fortunate in that I've actually gotten to meet and work for my heroes. That's a rare thing in life. So after Goldwater went down in flames and lost that election by a landslide, I began to study the 1960 election, the election between Nixon and Kennedy, a watershed election. And I concluded, and I've written 2 books on this, that the 1960 election had been stolen from Nixon, despite a series of errors that he made in that campaign, debating the lesser known and more telegenic John Kennedy, perhaps his greatest single error. So I wrote a letter to Nixon, who was then in exile practicing law in New York City. And I told him that if he decided to get back in politics, if he decided to make another go at becoming president, that I wanted in. Of course, he didn't know I was at that point 16 years old. In any event, 2 years later, these are the days when the telephone was on the wall in your home. My mother came in and said, there's a man on the phone, John Whitaker, says he works for former Vice President Nixon. I very speedily took the call, decided to go into New York City for an interview. When I arrived, it's pretty clear that they expected someone quite a bit older than I was, but I talked my way into a job as a gopher and essentially worked for John Mitchell, then Nixon's campaign manager, who would later, I think, famously and wrongly go to jail in Watergate. John Mitchell never approved the Watergate break-in. In any event, so I had an opportunity to meet Nixon, to work for Nixon, to see all the greats of the day, Barry Goldwater, Nelson Rockefeller, Billy Graham, many others. And because Nixon and Ronald Reagan were from the same Southern California political milieu, I was ultimately able to move from Nixon's re-election campaign, 1972, where I was the youngest member of the staff, to working for Ronald Reagan in his 1976 campaign, when we challenged Gerald Ford, very close run thing, and then came back in 1980 to handle the northeastern states, soundly defeating George H.W. Bush in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, the states that I handled. Then came back to handle his reelection in those same states, plus Ohio and Pennsylvania. In any event, it was in 1980, while working for Reagan, that I was trying to recruit members for my finance committee, for the Reagan Finance Committee, that I met this brash real estate mogul, Donald Trump. And once I convinced him to contribute and to raise some money, we became fast friends. After the election, rather than go into government, which I have very little interest, I hung my shingle doing public affairs. My first client was the Trump Organization. And from that time, I began to spend more time with Trump. And by 1988, I began to think about the idea of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. I saw that he had the stature, the independence, the stamina, the chutzpah, if you will, the courage to be not just a great presidential candidate, but actually be a great president. So I may be among, if not the first person in the United States to see Trump as a potential presidential candidate, as well as a potential president. I was the first person hired as a consultant in his 2015 run up to the 2016 election. And the rest is history. I was, of course,
it certainly is history. Absolutely fascinating. We're going to be doing a deeper dive into that. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Roger Stone. Don't touch that dial.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers. Today's news talk. The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Stone. Now, Roger, you were talking about your wonderful relationship with presidents and various presidents throughout history. You've also been linked to some of the most controversial moments in US political history, including Watergate and the Brooks Brothers riot. What was your role and how do you reflect on those events now?
Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that the fake news media narrative of those events are not exactly the truth. I've written about this very extensively. So let's take the so-called Brooks Brothers riot. We were doing a recount in Miami-Dade County in the very close presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. The Democrats sought to recount the same pile of ballots that had been recounted twice before. And when they sought to take those ballots behind closed doors with no observers from the media or from both parties, that's a violation of Florida's state sunshine law. So I was not in the building, but I was in touch with our people in the building, and I said, don't let them take those ballots out of public view. It was a violation of law. In the end, they were just trying to find additional votes. Now, in all honesty, if Al Gore's handlers had demanded a recount of every county in Florida, which is 67 counties, I think there's some prospect that they would have found enough votes to award the state to Al Gore. But instead, they only made the strategic mistake of only recounting in certain counties. And ultimately, they came up short by, I think it was 538 votes. But the idea that I shut down a recount, no, I shut down the violation of the Sunshine Law. I prevented the third recount of the same group of ballots that had been counted twice before. A perfect example. Now, that's not the story that you will read necessarily online, but if you go to stonezone.com, I've written extensively about that particular incident, just as an example.
And that's why I always say what I love about the operations here on the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, is that we have that chance to set the record straight and to give people a chance to respond to the various accusations. Now, you talk about your relationship with Donald Trump, which spans decades. As you say, you worked with his casino business in the 1990s to advising on the 2015 campaign. In 2015, there was a public falling out with Trump, and this is something you could maybe help us with as well. You claimed you quit while he said you were fired. What's the real story?
Well, I did quit. You can prove this because I shared my resignation letter with a New York Times reporter the night before, and also with a Miami Herald reporter. I resigned because I had a book coming out on Bill and Hillary Clinton, the Clintons' war on women. I did not want the book attributed to the campaign. It was all mine, although everything in it is very thoroughly documented. The president insisted that I was fired. I guess he thought that I was going to leave the campaign and attack him. And instead, I left the campaign and I waged kind of a one-man campaign to talk about the Trump I know and why he should be president. He would later praise me for my loyalty. And I do think the information I produced in my book gave a fuller picture of who Hillary Clinton and her husband really were. So I remain on excellent terms with the president. It's not a secret that I was targeted in the Mueller investigation. They say I lied under oath in my voluntary testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Well, first of all, how do you lie about Russian collusion that we now know definitively never actually happened? What I learned a year after I was pardoned is that the judge in my case withheld exculpatory evidence from my attorneys at trial, that being Robert Mueller's final report, which was now public because BuzzFeed sued the Justice Department for the release of that document, which was being closely held. I guess they thought it would be embarrassing to me. It ended up exonerating me because Mueller admits that there were no factual basis to prosecute me for Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration or any other crime. Now, of course, you won't see that in the New York Times. You won't see it in the Washington Post. It did get covered here by Zero Hedge, got covered by the Gateway Pundit. Anyone can go to the final unredacted report. It's a public document. It's on page 178 through 179. It basically admits that they could find none of the crimes that they initially accused me of, which were treason, conspiracy against the government, counterfeiting, money laundering, unauthorized access to a government computer, mail fraud, wire fraud, aiding and abetting. Of course, I wasn't charged with any of those things. Now, to violate the False Statements Act, your statement must not only be willfully false, but it has to be material, meaning it has to cover some underlying crime. There was no underlying crime. The real reason that I was charged was to pressure me into testifying against Trump falsely. I already taken 3 lie detector tests, 3 polygraph tests conducted by the same people who do it for the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So what they wanted me to admit to was a lie, and I refused to do that, which is why all of the Mueller prosecutions at this point have largely been discredited. But it was the reason that the president realized that I was being prosecuted for strictly political reasons, largely because I refused to cooperate by bearing false witness against him.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying all of that. We will be looking further at some of these reports and getting Roger Stone's reaction to those. We're going to take a quick break for the news headlines. Don't touch that dial.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Stone. Roger, we were trying to set the record straight and get your reaction to a number of news reports. I always say that if you don't read the newspaper, you're ill-informed. If you read the newspapers, you're misinformed. Well, never has there been a truer side to that than punctuating your life? Now, you did the brilliant documentary Get Me Roger Stone, released in 2017, and that detailed your life and political strategies. It received critical acclaim. It paints a very vivid picture of your life in politics. Did it capture, do you think it's a fair capture assessment of who you were, or were there any aspects you felt where you were being misrepresented?
Well, first of all, you understand my view that all publicity is good publicity, and they did spell my name right. There are a few little things in there that I quibble with that are factually incorrect, but overall, I think it's an accurate reflection. I'm a political animal. I will do anything to elect my candidate, short of breaking the law. And it is a motto, I guess. It is a watchword. Politics ain't beanbag. This is a rough and tumble sport in this country, as it is in your own. But I've given as well as I have gotten, I think. And I remain committed to helping candidates and causes that I believe in. The most disturbing thing is I really do think that the mainstream media in the 60s and even the 70s was more balanced, was somewhat fairer today. I reject the idea, for example, that CNN is a news outlet or a journalistic enterprise. I don't get my news from CNN for the same reason I don't eat out of the toilet. And it's just interesting looking today. I had a request from the BBC, a request that I will not be granting because I'm not interested in doing an interview. The last time they did with them, it became a shouting match. They repeatedly accused me of being a Russian spy. As someone whose family members were mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956, it's an absurdity. No evidence to that effect was ever found. I do think today there's a reason why no one is watching CNN, while no one is watching MSNBC, and it's why those who are interested in the truth have moved to the internet, moved to programs like yours to get a more balanced view of what's really going on in the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. Is we have to give a platform. We may not agree with everything you say, but we have to have a platform where it's not a shouting match. It really is unpacking the evidence, and evidence is basically people who can reach informed decisions by listening to all sides. You mentioned there were some inaccuracies in that documentary. Tell me what those inaccuracies were.
Well, for example, the idea that I destroyed the Reform Party on behalf of the Bushes. I was never a Bush Republican. I was a Reagan Republican. I was actually opposed to George H.W. Bush being on the ticket with Reagan. Donald Trump did explore the Reform Party nomination briefly before he concluded that one had to be either a Republican or a Democrat. To get on the ballot in the United States as an independent or as a minor party candidate is an extraordinarily difficult process. The laws about ballot access are written by Republicans and Democrats working together to make it as difficult as possible for insurgents within either party or for independents or new parties to get a foothold and get started. So that, for example, is one of the things in the film that is incorrect. On the other hand, they do capture the fact that I'm a happy warrior. I enjoy what I'm doing. I think politics is fun. I like winning, and I like to do it when I'm particularly well dressed. It's just a part of my thing.
Yeah, definitely particularly well dressed indeed, and some glorious outfits in that particular documentary. I want to talk about January the 6th, and posts on X and various reports have linked you to the events of January the 6th. How do you respond to those allegations, and what was your actual involvement that day?
None whatsoever. This is really simple. Any claim that I knew in advance about, participated in, or condoned any illegal activity on January 6th is categorically false. There's been very extensive investigations by the Justice Department. The FBI cleared me as early as July of 2020. Simply nothing to it. It wasn't at the Capitol. Now, it is true that because I could not find anybody to hire for personal security, all off-duty DC police officers being called into work, I did have a voluntary security detail from the Oath Keepers, which proves absolutely nothing. Now, ABC News, I think, resorting to what we call guilt by association. I stood out in front of my hotel that morning. I actually never left my hotel on January 6th. I had my picture taken with thousands of people probably in 2 days. But here's a picture of Roger Stone with this person. I don't know the identity of everybody that I had my picture taken with, but no evidence has ever surfaced that I was involved in the events of the Capitol on January 6th. Also, by the way, just from a rational point of view, I don't understand who would think that trespassing and breaking into the Capitol would be politically beneficial to Donald Trump. I would never think that, and I never thought it, nor did I know of any plans to do so. It's interesting that Joshua James, who was one of the men assigned to my security detail, actually never knew the others because of the COVID-19 restrictions. They were never allowed in my hotel. Saw them outside the hotel. It was terrible sleet weather. Most of them were wearing ski masks. But he testified under oath in New York City that I knew nothing about their plans and had no involvement. So those on X who claim otherwise are simply wrong. Trust me, I watched the president's speech on the ellipse from my hotel room. And then, strangely enough, the phone in my hotel room rang, and there were two Secret Service agents in the lobby who said they were there to escort me to the Capitol, which I thought was weird because I had no plans to go to the Capitol. I never intended to go to the Capitol. And I didn't go to the Capitol. They were rather angry when I told them I wasn't going to go. The implication was, of course, that the president had sent them. We now know that that's false. But I have no involvement in January 6th. I do think that there are people who did not go in the Capitol, did not engage in any violent activity at all, did not destroy public property, did not attack a police officer, but who get long draconian sentences for standing in the wrong place. I agree with the great research of Dr. Darren Beatty over at revolver.com. This was a Fedsurrection. It was a setup. Those giant doors have to be opened from the inside by someone with the code to open them. So any claim that I was involved in January 6th, which was politically counterproductive, and there's no evidence tying me to any of that, other than guilt by association. Do I know Enrique Tarrio? Yes, I do. So what? What does that prove? No text message, no chat room, no encrypted message, no phone call, no email, no witness. This is your classic guilt by association. By the way, the voters voted. This was January 6th was one of the major talking points here in our last election. I think most Americans have moved on, don't buy the government's underlying argument. I do feel sorry for those who have been pardoned, fully pardoned, but the Bureau of Prisons refuses to release. One particular case, Jeremy Brown, a decorated Army Green Beret Master Sergeant. The government approached him about becoming an informant. He declined. He was there on January 6th, but he didn't break any laws either. Wasn't in the Capitol, didn't engage any police officers. Yet, despite the fact that he has a pardon, the Bureau of Prisons refuses to release him. They just keep moving him from prison to prison to prison. His mother calls me almost every night crying. The pardon certainly covers anything he was charged with. I think he should be released.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to be looking at the man who killed Kennedy, and we're going to be joined by one of my co-hosts here on The Pulse, Pele Neroth Taylor. Don't touch that dial.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers. Today's news talk, The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined by Roger Stone. We've been unpacking his life, clarifying some of what Roger says have been misrepresentations and disinformation in the press about him and his various activities. And I want to look now at JFK and the assassination. It's all very topical, with papers may or may not be released, and we're going to find out the truth story. Well, Roger wrote a book called The Man Who Killed Kennedy a little while ago, and to help us unpack that, delighted to be joined by Pele Neroth-Taylor, one of my co-hosts on The Pulse, who's written a book on the as yet unsolved assassination of Sweden's JFK, Olof Palme, and in 1986, apparently the second largest murder investigation in the world after the Kennedy assassination. He's also written a book on the suspicious death of Dag Hammarskjöld in a plane crash in British Northern Rhodesia in 1961. Kennedy was a great admirer, calling him the greatest statesman of the century, and they worked together for global peace in the short period in 1961 when their careers overlapped. Roger, let me start with you, because in your brilliant book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, you talk about his motive and involvement. You claim that Lyndon Johnson had both the motive and means to orchestrate JFK's assassination. Talk to me about the specific motives that you believe were the most compelling for LBJ.
Certainly. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the sitting vice president, was under investigation in two highly celebrated corruption scandals, the Billy Sol Estes scandal and the Bobby Baker scandal. In both of these, he was in serious trouble. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy's brother, had begun telling people that Johnson would be dropped from the 1964 ticket and was likely to face prosecution. It is my contention that was the major motivation for Lyndon Johnson. He was a man staring into the abyss. Now, I do not allege that I did this acting alone. I do think I don't like the word conspiracy. There was a plot that involved the Central Intelligence Agency, Texas Oil, the organized crime, the mob, and others. Each of them had their own individual reason for wanting to get rid of John Kennedy. But Johnson's motivation was the most acute. So it is my contention, first of all, there are multiple shooters. The brilliant documentary just out from Paramount titled What the Parkland Doctors Saw, where various doctors who attended Kennedy say they saw wounds in JFK consistent with his being shot from the front and the back, which means multiple shooters, which in turn means a conspiracy. But it is my contention that the shooter from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building was a man named Malcolm Mac Wallace. We know this for several reasons. One, Wallace left his fingerprints on the window encasement and also on the cardboard boxes that fashioned the crow's nest from which the shooter allegedly shot. No less than 6 witnesses, 3 of them in the prison across the way from the Texas School Book Depository building, 3 on the ground, identify a man in the window who meets the physical description of Wallace, middle-aged, heavy-set, balding, with spectacles. That's not Lee Harvey Oswald. Just 2 weeks ago, an audio was released that was produced by Billy Sol Estes, again, a Johnson crony, produced by his great-great-grandson, in which Billy Sol, talking to Cliff Carter, who was the executive director of the Democrat National Committee and Johnson's chief political operative, in which they discussed the fact that Lyndon Johnson had hired Malcolm Mac Wallace to shoot John Kennedy. This was big news here in the States just about 2 weeks ago. But in every case here, as I say, the others involved had their own motives. Central Intelligence Agency was upset with Kennedy over his handling of the Bay of Pigs, the failed invasion of Cuba. Like many conservatives, for a long time, I believed the claim that failed because John Kennedy had failed to provide air support for the men storming the beaches. But further research indicates that the plan that John Kennedy inherited from Dwight Eisenhower and from a working group chaired by Vice President Richard Nixon, included 29 fighter jets that were supposed to be Panamanian flagged, but flown by Cuban pilots, flown out of Panama to provide cover for the men storming the beaches. Charles Cable, the number 2 man in the CIA, inexplicably canceled that air support the day before the invasion without Kennedy's knowledge. When the invasion began to fail, largely because it had leaked, Castro knew when the invasion was coming, where it was coming. Men were being cut to ribbons by sharpshooters on the beach. Curtis LeMay, who was the head of the Air Force, went to John Kennedy and argued that the only way to save the day was to send in U.S. fighter jets. John Kennedy had approved the Bay of Pigs only if it looked plausibly like an indigenous Cuban uprising, and refused to order that move by the Air Force. Now, I think it was meant on LeMay's part as a provocation for war not with Cuba, but war with Russia. So John Kennedy, it was not his fault that the Bay of Pigs failed. And then, of course, there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, where you've been told an entirely false narrative 45 years after the event. When documents are declassified, we find out that the Kennedy brothers agreed to remove NATO missiles from Turkey and Italy, changing the balance of power in Europe, in return for a pledge from Nikita Khrushchev, the Russian dictator, to remove the missiles from Cuba, although that agreement did not include on-site inspections. So the Central Intelligence Agency had deep distrust of Kennedy and vice versa. This new order by President Trump is interesting because the act of Congress that mandated the release of the Kennedy assassination documents actually set a time of 2017, and they were supposed to be released then. President Trump released about 80% of the material. We found out a lot of very interesting things, but the Central Intelligence Agency director, Mike Pompeo, persuaded President Trump to hold back 20% of the documents. He told Judge Andrew Napolitano this, he told Sean Hannity this, he told me this, now he's said it publicly. So I think that gives us some hint of what this upcoming material should contain. My concern, of course, is that much of the material will be redacted with these huge black marks, and the American people still won't know the truth. I do think that it's also key to understand that not everything germane is in the so-called JFK assassinations document archive. In other words, there are other records at the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the FBI, the IRS, that I think need to be declassified or at least released to give a fuller picture. I expect that the CIA's role, which the documents that have already been released pretty heavily hint at, will be cemented in the release of these documents if the documents are complete and if they are unredacted. That remains to be seen.
Yeah, and remains to be seen, and we will keep revisiting. Pele, I want to bring you in on this because you've been doing your own research. Do you believe that the official story of Goswald as the lone gunman is a cover up, Pele?
It's a cover up. Absolutely, he didn't do it, and all you need to. People think they have to dive in and read hundreds of books and go really down the rabbit hole, but all they need to watch is a 2-minute video of Kennedy driving along with his limousine and the headshot coming from the front. His head jerks back, That's it. That's all you need to know. That the official story isn't true, and then the real story is much more complex. But I just want to say, I'll fire off a few remarks or observations that you wrote, Roger, because we won't have time. You won't have time to answer them, but you'll be able to choose which one you can answer, and maybe we could have you on another time. Kennedy was getting closer to Khrushchev in the autumn of 1963. You read that James Douglas book about him talking about a joint moon program, and they're writing each other peace letters. The Cuba crisis gave both gentlemen a horrific shock. And, we were very close to nuclear war because the Russians had tactical nuclear missiles on Cuba, which they had authorization to fire locally. And even tactical missiles would have devastated Miami and Florida and the Gulf Coast, Gulf of America. But but the Joint Chiefs, wanted to bomb Cuba, and they were going to bomb, or they were putting huge pressure if Kennedy hadn't solved through his back channel with the that Russian guy, what is it, Bolshakov or something. So we very narrowly avoided nuclear war. And then there was a Russian submarine in the waters outside Cuba, which also was about to fire off a tactical nuclear missile when it was being depth charged. And what happened was that the third guy on board, the third captain on board, said no, and it didn't happen. So we were very close to nuclear war, and we wouldn't be sitting here if it hadn't been for Kennedy's statesmanship. The thing about what I researched with Hammarskjöld was he was reporting they were going to move the United Nations to Berlin to stop the Berlin crisis, which is a forerunner of the Cuba crisis. But I won't go into more detail about that now. You're a friend of Trump. I mean, you've got his ear. Trump has got RFK Jr. by his side. Trump started out as a Democrat, he's survived 2 assassination attempts. There have probably been God knows many more. He knows he's attracting enemies left, right, and center. Brits, God knows who, Ukrainians. Is he very aware that is he very interested on a personal level solving the assassination? And I know RFK apparently has one of the largest libraries in the United States of Kennediana. And is the and related to your book, I read both your book on Nixon, and Nixon's Watergate, of course, was very much related to the fact that the CIA were getting very irritated, both at his détente policies. They didn't know what Kissinger was doing, flying to Moscow and Peking. And secondly, he was nosing around in the Kennedy assassination. So the Kennedy assassination actually helped topple the presidency of Nixon as well. And Watergate was a CIA operation. That idea that the Washington Post toppled him, that's for the birds, it was a deep state op. And that comes out very clearly in your Nixon book. But my question is, does Trump feel that the weight of history is on his shoulder? He could be a third Kennedy type assassination victim. And the second thing is, we probably won't have time. Assuming that it was this guy, Malcolm Wallace, who was, on the 6th floor, maybe, who was at the grassy knoll? Because we've got all these possibilities. We've got the mafia, we've got the CIA, we've got LBJ's Texas mates, but they're not all going to are they all going to collaborate? Oh, you stand over there, I'll stand over here, and I'll stand over here, and we'll each take a shot at Kennedy. It wasn't going to be like that, was it? It was one singular plot. So who did LBJ organize to stand at the grassy knoll? Over to you.
Well, Johnson, of course, as the Senate Majority Leader, appointed himself, which is rare, to the Subcommittee of Defense Appropriations, where the CIA black box budgets were prepared. So he was the paymaster to the CIA. He also had close relationships with organized crime. A man named Jack Haufer was bribing Johnson to cover up the illegal gambling going on in Texas, in Dallas, and Houston, and San Antonio. 3 days after Johnson became president, Haufer, who had been convicted on other charges, was suddenly pardoned. So I think that there is multiple shooters. I think the Paramount movie kind of demonstrates that. I think that the shooter along the fence line at the grassy knoll, and there are witnesses from the railroad tower who describe what they saw behind the fence, is most likely a contract killer. I think he is Corsican. Nicoletti, I believe, is his name. I think that he's that shooter. Johnny Roselli, who's kind of a flamboyant gangster, claims that he was a shooter from the sewer grate. I think there was a shooter in the sewer grate. I'm not sure it was Roselli. But when Roselli was subpoenaed to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, before he could testify, his body was found floating in an oil drum off of Miami. So I think there are multiple shooters. I think the agency is involved. I think the mob is involved. Great book by Antoinette Giancana, Sam Giancana, the Chicago gangster's daughter. There were recordings of bugs that were sent up in his prison cell, where he talks about the assassination both before and after the fact. So I think Johnson has a unique relationship with everyone else involved in the assassination. And I think piece by piece, this is all coming out. As far as Trump's view, I think we'll learn a lot more now about the 2 assassination attempts on him in the United States. They make very little sense. The Secret Service the state police and the local police know that there's a man with a gun who's been seen with a range fire. They know this for 92 minutes, but they don't evacuate the president as per the requirements of the Secret Service manual. Why? Why are the Secret Service, the state police, and local police are all on different radio frequencies, so they can't talk to each other? The local police offer to the Secret Service to do a drone surveillance of the entire perimeter of the sealed site where the event is being held. The Secret Service says, no, thanks, we've got it covered. Local police offer twice, but then that drone surveillance never gets conducted because we're told the Secret Service can't figure out how the technology that they have contracted for operates. So a number of unanswered questions. I'm still not sure to this day that the man they say was the killer, Thomas Matthew Crooks, is actually the killer. They tell us he acted alone, but we see still photos of him on the photograph. He's talking to someone on the phone. But the intelligence agencies say they can't break the encryption on his phone. Apple won't turn over his phone records, which is funny because they turned my phone records over to Robert Mueller without a subpoena. How strange.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Roger. That there are so many more questions that we need to answer. We will get you back. It's been a delight having you on the show, unpacking some of the stories and some of the misrepresentations in the press. If people haven't yet got it, do look out for that book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy: The Case Against LBJ. Roger, thank you very much for joining me here on the Muckbreakers. Pele, you're coming up later tonight, so people can look forward to seeing that. I'll be back with you at the new time of 8 o'clock tomorrow night on Thursday, and I'll be back with you at 5 o'clock on Friday. But for now, from me, Andrew Eborn, thanks a lot to my wonderful guests. I'll see you next time.